The whole auto shop fell silent when 16-year-old Chloe Baker, covered in grease stains and wearing her father's oversized work shirt, stepped up to the 1947 Tucker torpedo engine that had stumped every expert for months. Gregory Caldwell, the arrogant millionaire collector in his $1,000 suit, had just offered the challenge as a cruel joke, expecting her to embarrass herself in front of the cameras rolling for his vintage car documentary. But when Chloe placed her hands on the cold metal and whispered something that made every mechanic in the room freeze, nobody was prepared for what she was about to reveal. Within the next 2 hours, this small-town girl would not only solve the impossible puzzle that had defeated engineering professors and master craftsmen, but uncover a buried family secret that would rewrite automotive history and transform her struggling father's garage into the most talked-about shop in the country. What happened that day in Clearwater, Ohio, would prove that sometimes the greatest discoveries come from the most unexpected places, and that the knowledge passed down through generations can be more powerful than any degree hanging on a wall. Quick pause before we continue. Tell us, where in the world are you watching from? If you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit subscribe because tomorrow's episode is absolutely mind-blowing. Chati morning sun cast long shadows across the cracked pavement of Baker Auto Repair, located on the corner of Industrial Avenue and 3rd Street in Clearwater, Ohio. The faded red brick building had weathered 43 years of Midwest winters, its paint peeling like old skin, revealing the rust-colored metal underneath. A hand-painted sign hung crooked above the entrance, the letters spelling out the family name that had served this blue-collar community since 1980. Stephen Baker wiped his calloused hands on a rag already stained beyond recognition, his tired eyes surveying the empty bays that should have been filled with customers' vehicles. At 48, the lines around his eyes told the story of a man who had worked every day since he was 16, learning the trade from his father-in-law before taking over the business. His graying hair was perpetually tousled, and his work uniform bore the permanent marks of engine oil and hydraulic fluid. The shop's interior revealed the stark reality of a struggling business. Tool chests lined the walls, their red paint faded and drawers slightly askew from years of heavy use. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across workbenches cluttered with spare parts, diagnostic equipment, and coffee-stained repair manuals. The concrete floor, stained with decades of automotive fluids, showed the wear patterns of countless vehicles that had been serviced in these bays. Ethan Cooper, the shop's 22-year-old mechanic, emerged from beneath a 1998 Honda Civic, his young face smudged with grease. His work coveralls hung loose on his thin frame, and his sandy brown hair stuck out at odd angles from lying on the creeper. Despite his youth, Ethan possessed steady hands and an intuitive understanding of engine diagnostics that impressed even seasoned mechanics. "Mr. Baker, we got another overdue notice from the parts supplier," Ethan said, holding up an envelope with red lettering. "They're threatening to cut off our credit if we don't pay by Friday." Stephen took the envelope without opening it, adding it to a stack of similar notices on his desk. The wooden surface was barely visible beneath the pile of bills, work orders, and correspondence from creditors. A framed photograph of his late wife Eleanor sat prominently among the chaos, her gentle smile a constant reminder of better times. "We'll figure something out," Stephen replied, though his voice lacked conviction. "Mrs. Patterson is bringing her Buick in this afternoon, and the Morrison family said they might need transmission work." Arthur Jackson, a 65-year-old veteran mechanic and Stephen's closest friend, looked up from the brake job he was completing. His weathered hands moved with the precision of decades of experience, each movement economical and purposeful. Arthur had worked alongside Stephen's father-in-law and had watched Stephen grow from an eager apprentice into a skilled craftsman and business owner. "Stephen, you know I'd lend you whatever I could, but Betty and I are barely making it on my pension." Arthur said, his gravelly voice filled with genuine concern. Maybe it's time to consider Frank Davis's offer to merge the shops. The suggestion hung in the air like exhaust fumes. Frank Davis, who owned the competing auto repair shop across town, had made several offers to buy out Stephen's business at well below market value. The prospect of losing the family legacy weighed heavily on Stephen's shoulders, a burden that seemed to grow heavier each passing day. Before Stephen could respond, the rumble of expensive engines echoed from the street. Through the grimy windows, they watched as a convoy of 3 black luxury SUVs pulled into the small parking area in front of the shop. The vehicles gleamed in the morning sunlight, their chrome details reflecting the industrial surroundings like mirrors. "What in the world?" Ethan muttered, setting down his wrench and wiping his hands on his coveralls. The first SUV's door opened, and out stepped Gregory Caldwell, a man whose very presence commanded attention. At 55, he possessed the confident bearing of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. His charcoal grey suit was impeccably tailored, the fabric so fine it seemed to repel the industrial atmosphere of the shop. Gold cufflinks caught the light as he adjusted his silk tie, and his Italian leather shoes had never touched anything grittier than marble floors. Caldwell's silver hair was perfectly styled, not a strand out of place despite the morning breeze. His pale blue eyes surveyed the shop with the detached interest of someone examining a museum exhibit. A thin smile played at the corners of his mouth, suggesting amusement at finding himself in such humble surroundings. Behind him emerged a small crew of professionals carrying camera equipment, lighting rigs, and sound recording devices. The film crew moved with practiced efficiency, immediately beginning to set up their equipment despite the shop's cramped quarters. A young woman with a clipboard directed the crew's activities, her designer clothes and expensive handbag marking her as another outsider in this working-class environment. "Mr. Baker, I presume." Caldwell's voice carried the cultured accent of private schools and exclusive country clubs. He extended a manicured hand towards Stephen, who hesitantly wiped his own hands before accepting the handshake. "That's right. Stephen Baker, this is my shop," Stephen replied, his voice cautious as he tried to understand why such obviously wealthy people had come to his struggling business. "Excellent. I'm Gregory Caldwell, CEO of Caldwell Automotive Holdings. Perhaps you've heard of our restoration division? We specialize in high-end vintage vehicles for discerning collectors." Stephen shook his head, unfamiliar with the name despite decades in the automotive industry. Caldwell's smile widened slightly as if this ignorance confirmed his assumptions about small-town mechanics. "No matter. I'm here because of a rather unique situation. We're filming a documentary about impossible automotive challenges, and I have with me what might be the most difficult engine restoration project in the country." The second SUV's rear doors opened, revealing a custom trailer designed for transporting delicate automotive components. 2 men in matching polo shirts carefully wheeled out a metal platform supporting an engine block covered by a black tarp. The object beneath was clearly substantial, the platform's wheels creaking under the weight as they maneuvered it into the shop. "This, gentlemen, is a 1947 Tucker torpedo engine," Caldwell announced, with theatrical flair as his assistants positioned the platform in the center of the main bay. One of only 51 vehicles ever produced, and this particular engine has a rather interesting history. Arthur stepped closer, his experienced eye studying the covered form. "Tucker Torpedo? Preston Tucker's car company? I heard stories about those vehicles when I was young. Revolutionary design, way ahead of their time." "Indeed. This engine was removed from Tucker number 37, which was involved in a mysterious accident in 1948. The engine suffered catastrophic damage that has puzzled restoration experts for over 70 years. We've had teams from Detroit, specialists From Germany, even professors from MIT examined this engine. Every single one of them declared it impossible to repair. Stephen frowned, wondering why such an obviously expensive project had been brought to his modest shop. Mr. Caldwell, I appreciate the opportunity, but if experts with advanced degrees and unlimited resources couldn't fix it, I'm not sure what we could accomplish here. Caldwell's laugh was sharp and dismissive. Oh, I'm not expecting you to succeed, Mr. Baker. This is purely for the entertainment value of the documentary. We want to show what happens when an impossible challenge meets real-world mechanics. The contrast should make for compelling television. The condescending tone wasn't lost on anyone in the shop. Ethan's jaw tightened and Arthur's expression hardened. Stephen felt his own temper rising but forced himself to remain professional. We'll take a look at it, Stephen said carefully, but I want to be clear that we charge for diagnostic time even if we can't complete the repair. Of course. Money is no object. Caldwell waved dismissively, then gestured to his film crew. Set up the cameras to capture the full workspace. I want multiple angles when they remove the tarp. As the crew arranged their equipment, positioning lights and adjusting camera angles, Stephen noticed movement from the office area. His daughter Chloe emerged from the small apartment above the shop, her long brown hair tied back in a practical ponytail. She wore faded jeans with oil stains on the knees and an oversized work shirt that had belonged to her mother. At 16, Chloe possessed an unusual combination of her mother's gentle features and her father's determined spirit. Her green eyes held an intelligence that seemed older than her years, and her hands, though small, bore the calluses of someone who wasn't afraid of hard work. She had been helping in the shop since she was old enough to hold a wrench, absorbing automotive knowledge with the natural ease of a native speaker learning language. "Dad, what's all the commotion?" Chloe asked, wiping sleep from her eyes as she surveyed the film crew and expensive equipment. Caldwell's attention immediately shifted to her, his predatory smile returning. "And who might this young lady be?" "My daughter Chloe," Stephen replied, instinctively stepping slightly in front of her. "Chloe, this is Mr. Caldwell. He's brought us an engine restoration project." "How delightful." Caldwell's voice took on the exaggerated enthusiasm adults often used when speaking to children. "Tell me, young lady, do you help your father in his little shop?" Chloe's expression remained neutral, but Stephen caught the slight tightening around her eyes that indicated annoyance. "Sometimes. I've been learning about engines since I was little." "How charming. A family business." Caldwell turned to his camera crew. "This is even better than I hoped." The struggling small-town mechanic and his aspiring daughter faced with the impossible challenge, pure gold for the documentary. The film crew began recording as Caldwell's assistants prepared to remove the tarp from the engine. Stephen, Arthur, and Ethan gathered around the platform, their professional curiosity overriding their irritation with Caldwell's attitude. Chloe hung back near the office, but her eyes remained fixed on the covered engine. "Gentlemen, behold the impossible," Caldwell declared as the tarp was pulled away. The 1947 Tucker torpedo engine was unlike anything the mechanics had seen before. The horizontally opposed six-cylinder power plant was massive, its aluminum construction gleaming despite obvious damage. Complex cooling passages and innovative design elements marked it as a product of advanced engineering decades ahead of its time. However, the damage was immediately apparent and seemingly insurmountable. The engine block showed signs of catastrophic internal failure. Connecting rods protruded through holes blown in the crankcase, and the cylinder heads were cracked in multiple places. Most puzzling were the modifications that seemed to have been made before the failure. Custom components that didn't match any known Tucker specifications. Arthur whistled low. "That's not just broken, that's destroyed. What kind of accident could have caused damage like this? That's the mystery," Caldwell replied smoothly. According to the accident report, the vehicle simply stopped running during a test drive. When they opened the engine compartment, they found it in this condition. No impact damage to the car itself, no external cause for the failure. Stephen walked slowly around the platform, studying the damage from different angles. His trained eye catalogued the various problems: the blown engine block, the damaged pistons visible through the holes, the cracked heads, and the mysterious custom components that seemed to serve no identifiable purpose. Mr. Caldwell, with all due respect, this engine didn't just fail, Stephen said slowly. Something caused this level of destruction, and these modifications, they're not standard Tucker components. Precisely why it's been deemed impossible to repair. Every expert who's examined it has reached the same conclusion. The damage is too extensive, the modifications too mysterious, and the original specifications too poorly documented. Caldwell glanced at his watch, a gold timepiece that probably cost more than Stephen's monthly mortgage payment. I'll give you exactly 2 hours with it. Document your best efforts for the cameras, and then we'll load it up and move on to the next shop. The dismissive tone and arbitrary time limits stung. Stephen felt his professional pride bristling at being treated like a performer in Caldwell's entertainment project. But the shop's financial situation left him with little choice but to accept whatever payment Caldwell offered. Fine, 2 hours, Stephen agreed reluctantly. As Stephen, Arthur, and Ethan began their initial examination of the engine, Caldwell retreated to a position where he could observe without getting his expensive clothes dirty. The film crew captured every angle, their equipment humming quietly as they recorded what they expected to be another example of small-town incompetence. "Well, what do you think?" Ethan asked, his voice low enough that the cameras couldn't pick up his words. Arthur shook his head grimly. "Honestly, I think that rich boy is right. This thing is destroyed beyond any reasonable repair." Stephen nodded, reluctantly, but his attention was drawn to Chloe, who had moved closer to the engine, despite Caldwell's obvious desire to keep her at a distance. Her green eyes studied the damaged power plant with an intensity that surprised him. "Chloe, maybe. You should go upstairs while we work on this," Stephen suggested gently. "Can I just look at it for a minute?" she asked, her voice carrying a strange note of urgency that caught everyone's attention. Caldwell's laugh cut through the garage like a blade. "Oh, this is priceless. The little princess wants to take a crack at the impossible engine. By all means, young lady, give it your best shot. I'm sure our viewers will find it highly entertaining." The mocking tone and condescending smile were designed to humiliate, but something unexpected happened. Instead of retreating in embarrassment, Chloe stepped forward with quiet confidence, her eyes never leaving the damaged engine. "Chloe, you don't have to prove anything to this man," Stephen said firmly, his protective instincts overriding his business concerns. But Chloe was already moving toward the engine, her small hands reaching out to touch the cold metal surface. The moment her fingers made contact with the aluminum block, something changed in her expression. Her eyes narrowed with sudden focus, and her breathing became shallow and controlled. The film crew sensed drama and adjusted their cameras to capture every moment of what they expected to be an embarrassing failure. Caldwell's smile widened as he anticipated the humiliation of a small-town girl attempting something that had defeated acknowledged experts. "This should be good," he murmured to his assistant, loud enough for the microphones to pick up. But as Chloe's hands moved across the engine's surface, tracing the damaged components and mysterious modifications with surprising familiarity, the atmosphere in the shop began to shift. Her fingers paused at specific points, her eyes studying details that the adults had overlooked. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, but clear enough for everyone to hear, Chloe spoke words that would change everything. This engine wasn't destroyed by accident. Someone tried to hide what it really was. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The silence that followed Chloe's statement stretched across the garage like a taut wire ready to snap. Every eye in the room focused on the 16-year-old girl who had just suggested that one of automotive history's greatest mysteries wasn't an accident at all. The film crew instinctively leaned forward, their cameras capturing the moment when everything changed. Gregory Caldwell's confident smile faltered for just an instant before returning with forced intensity. His manicured fingers drummed against his thigh, a nervous habit that betrayed his practiced composure. The expensive fabric of his suit seemed suddenly out of place among the honest grime and authentic wear of the working garage. "I'm sorry, what did you just say?" Caldwell's voice carried a sharp edge that cut through his previous condescending tone. Chloe didn't look up from the engine as she responded, her small hands continuing their methodical exploration of the damaged components. Her fingers traced the jagged edges of the blown cylinders with surprising confidence, as if she were reading a story written in twisted metal and shattered aluminum. "These fracture patterns aren't random," she said, her voice steady despite the weight of adult. Attention focused on her. When an engine fails catastrophically, the damage spreads outward from a single point of failure. "But look here, and here, and here." She pointed to 3 different locations on the engine block where the metal had ruptured. Her father, Stephen, moved closer, squinting at the areas she indicated. Arthur Jackson set down his tools and approached. From the other side, his weathered face creased with concentration. "The damage points are too symmetrical," Chloe continued, her fingers now exploring a series of bolt holes that seemed oddly positioned. "And these mounting points don't match any Tucker engine specification I've seen in the repair manuals." Ethan Cooper's jaw dropped slightly. "Chloe, how do you know Tucker engine specifications? Those cars were built before your grandparents were born." A flush crept up Chloe's neck, but she didn't retreat from her examination. "I've been reading about them. The Tucker Corporation only produced 51 cars, but they were revolutionary. Rear-mounted engine, safety features decades ahead of their time, innovative cooling systems." Caldwell stepped forward aggressively, his polished shoes clicking on the concrete floor. "Young lady, I think you're getting a bit carried away with your imagination. This engine has been examined by teams of professional engineers and automotive historians. They all reached the same conclusion. Maybe they were looking for the wrong thing." Chloe replied quietly, still focused on the engine rather than the intimidating figure looming over her. The tension in the room was palpable. Stephen felt torn between pride in his daughter's technical knowledge and concern about confronting someone who clearly wielded significant power and influence. Arthur's expression had shifted from skepticism to grudging interest, while Ethan watched the exchange with the fascination of someone witnessing a David and Goliath confrontation. Chloe's hands moved to a section of the engine where custom brackets had been welded to the original casting. The workmanship was exceptional, so seamlessly integrated that casual observation would miss the modifications entirely. But under her careful examination, the alterations became obvious. "These brackets weren't part of the original design," she said, her voice gaining confidence. "They're supporting something that was removed before the engine was damaged. See how the bolt patterns are worn? Whatever was mounted here was heavy and vibrated during operation." Arthur knelt down beside her, his experienced eye following her. "Observations. I'll be damned, she's right. Those are definitely aftermarket modifications. High-quality work, too. Whoever did this knew what they were doing." Stephen found himself studying his daughter with new eyes. He had always known she was intelligent and mechanically inclined, but her current analysis demonstrated knowledge that went far beyond casual interest. Her observations were systematic, logical, and devastatingly accurate. "Where did you learn to analyze engine damage like this?" Stephen asked, his voice mixed with pride and bewilderment. "Grandma Eleanor's books," Chloe replied, finally looking up from the engine. She had a whole collection of technical manuals and engineering journals from the 1940s and 1950s. I found them in the attic last year when we were looking for Christmas decorations. The mention of his late wife's name sent a jolt through Stephen's chest. Eleanor had passed away when Chloe was only 10, but her influence on their daughter's intellectual development was apparently far greater than he had realized. Caldwell's expression had darkened considerably. I think we're getting off track. Here, this is supposed to be a documentation of restoration attempts, not a family history lesson. But Chloe was no longer listening to him. Her attention had shifted to a series of cooling passages that seemed unusually complex for a 1940s engine design. She traced the channels with her fingertip, following their path through the aluminum casting with growing excitement. This cooling system is incredible, she breathed. It's not just advanced for 1947, it's advanced for today. These passages create a thermal management system that would keep the engine running at optimal temperature under extreme conditions. Ethan leaned in closer. What kind of extreme conditions? Sustained high-performance operation, racing conditions, or maybe military applications? Chloe's eyes were bright with discovery. The Tucker Corporation was experimenting with military contracts during World War II. Maybe this engine wasn't just for passenger cars. Arthur nodded slowly, pieces of historical information clicking into place in his memory. I remember my father talking about Tucker's wartime work. They were developing armored vehicles and aircraft engines. Most of that work was classified. Caldwell's composure was beginning to crack. This is complete speculation. You're building elaborate theories based on normal manufacturing variations. And repair work? Then explain these, Chloe said, pointing to a series of small holes drilled into the engine block with surgical precision. These aren't manufacturing variations. They're deliberate modification points, and they were sealed with these. She pried at one of the holes with her fingernail, revealing that it had been filled with a plug made from a different metal alloy. The plug came free with minimal pressure, revealing a threaded hole that went deep into the engine block. Stephen's breath caught in his throat. "Chloe, be careful. We don't know what those holes were for." But Chloe was already examining the small metal plug, holding it up to the light. "This is aircraft-grade aluminum alloy. Much higher quality than what they used for automotive applications in the 1940s. And look at the threading pattern." She held the plug out for her father to examine. Stephen took it reluctantly, studying the precision machining and unusual thread pitch. Even with his decades of experience, he could see that this was no ordinary automotive component. "This is military specification," Arthur said grimly, taking the plug from Stephen's hand. "I've seen similar components in aircraft engines from World War II. The threading pattern is designed for high-pressure applications." Caldwell moved quickly to the platform, his previous theatrical demeanor replaced by urgent concern. "I think that's enough examination for today. We need to load this engine back onto the trailer and move on to our next location." "Why?" Chloe asked, her green eyes fixed on Caldwell with unsettling directness. "What are you afraid we might find?" Question hung in the air like a challenge. Caldwell's face flushed slightly, and his hands clenched into fists at his sides. For a moment, the polished veneer of corporate sophistication slipped, revealing something harder and more desperate. Underneath, "I'm not afraid of anything, young lady, but this is my property, and I determine how it's examined and by whom." "Actually," Stephen interjected, finding his voice and his backbone simultaneously, "you brought it here for us to work on. That means we have a professional obligation to perform a thorough diagnosis before declaring it unrepairable." Caldwell's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Mr. Baker, I think you're misunderstanding the nature of our arrangement. This is a film documentation of failure, not an actual restoration attempt." "Then why didn't you tell us that up front?" Ethan asked, his young voice carrying unexpected steel. You made it sound like you wanted us to actually try to fix it." The film crew continued recording, their cameras capturing every nuance of the growing confrontation. The assistant with the clipboard looked increasingly uncomfortable, sensing that the documentary was veering far from its intended script. Chloe had returned her attention to the engine, her hands now exploring the damaged cylinder heads with methodical precision. "Dad, these heads weren't just cracked by the explosion. Look at these stress patterns. Someone used a cutting torch on them before the damage occurred." Stephen knelt beside his daughter, following her pointing finger to areas where the metal showed signs of deliberate modification. The evidence was subtle, but unmistakable to a trained eye. Someone had carefully altered the cylinder heads before the catastrophic failure. "You're right," Stephen said quietly. "Those are torch cuts, not fracture lines. Someone was trying to remove something from these heads." Arthur joined them at the engine, his weathered hands tracing the same patterns Chloe had identified. "This is looking more like sabotage than mechanical failure. Someone wanted to make sure this engine could never run again." "But why?" Ethan asked, his voice filled with genuine curiosity. Chloe's hands had found another series of modifications, these hidden beneath layers of what appeared to be original casting, but was actually sophisticated camouflage work. "Because this engine could do something that someone didn't want the world to know about." She worked at the concealed modifications with her fingernails, gradually revealing mounting points for equipment that had been carefully removed and hidden. The workmanship was extraordinary, so skilled that only the most detailed examination would reveal the alterations. "These mounting points are for instrumentation," she said, her voice filled with growing excitement. "Temperature sensors, pressure monitors, maybe even performance recording equipment. This wasn't just an experimental engine, it was a test bed for advanced automotive technology." Caldwell's face had gone pale beneath his tan. "That's enough speculation. We're leaving, now." But Stephen had found his protective instincts as a father, combining with his professional pride as a mechanic. "Mr. Caldwell, my daughter has identified clear evidence of sabotage and deliberate concealment. As a professional, I can't ignore that." "Your daughter is a child playing with things she doesn't understand," Caldwell snapped, his composure finally cracking completely. "This engine is the property of Caldwell Automotive Holdings, and I'm removing it from your shop immediately." "Not until we understand what we're looking at," Arthur said firmly, his voice carrying the authority of decades in the automotive industry. "If this engine was sabotaged, there might be historical significance that goes beyond your documentary project." Chloe looked up from her examination, her young face serious beyond her years. "Mr. Caldwell, who owned this engine before you acquired it, and how did you know to bring it specifically to our shop?" The questions struck like lightning bolts, illuminating connections that none of the adults had considered. Caldwell's eyes darted between the cameras and the exit, clearly calculating his options. "That information is proprietary," he said stiffly. "Business confidential." "Everything's proprietary when you're trying to hide something," Chloe replied, with devastating simplicity. The 16-year-old girl stood up from her examination of the engine, her small frame dwarfed by the adults surrounding her. But her presence, somehow dominating the room. Oil stains marked her clothes and hands, but her eyes burned with the fire of discovery. "This engine holds secrets that someone has been trying to bury for over 70 years, she said quietly. "And I think Mr. Caldwell knows exactly what those secrets are." The camera crew continued filming, capturing every moment of what had become something far more significant than anyone had anticipated. The impossible engine was revealing its mysteries, but those revelations were leading down a path that someone had spent decades trying to conceal. Caldwell's hand moved toward his cell phone, but Arthur stepped forward with surprising speed for A man his age. I wouldn't make any calls just yet, Arthur said calmly. I think we all need to have a conversation about what's really going on here. The standoff in the garage stretched taut like a cable under stress, each person calculating their next move while the cameras continued their silent documentation of what had become far more than anyone anticipated. Chloe knelt beside the engine, once more her young hands moving with the confidence of someone who had found her element, while the adults watched with a mixture of admiration and growing apprehension. Caldwell's expensive shoes scraped against the concrete as he shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable with how the situation had evolved beyond his control. His perfectly styled silver hair showed the first signs of disorder, and small beads of perspiration had appeared on his forehead despite the cool morning air in the garage. "I'm calling this off," Caldwell announced, reaching for his phone with aggressive determination. "This has gone far enough." But Chloe's voice cut through his movement like a sharp blade. "Wait, look at this." Her fingers had found a section of the engine where the aluminum casting showed unusual wear patterns. Unlike the violent damage from the catastrophic failure, these marks were subtle, the kind of wear that develops over months or years of careful operation under specific conditions. Stephen moved closer to his daughter, drawn by the intensity of her focus. "What are you seeing, honey?" "These wear patterns on the fuel rail mounting points," Chloe said, her voice filled with growing excitement. "They're not consistent with a carburetor system. This engine had fuel injection." Arthur's weathered eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Fuel injection in 1947? That's impossible. Electronic fuel injection wasn't commercially available until the 1980s. "Not electronic," Chloe corrected, her fingers tracing the worn mounting points with practiced precision. "Mechanical fuel injection. The Germans were experimenting with it during the war for aircraft engines. The wear patterns show where precision metering equipment was mounted." Ethan leaned over her shoulder, studying the areas she indicated. "How can you tell the difference between carburetor wear and injection system wear?" Chloe pointed to a series of small holes drilled with mathematical precision around the intake manifold area. "Carburetors create relatively low pressure and don't require this level of mounting stability, but mechanical fuel injection operates under much higher pressures and needs rigid, vibration-resistant mounting systems." She worked her way around the engine, identifying additional evidence of the sophisticated fuel delivery system. Each discovery built upon the previous one, creating a technical picture that challenged everything the adults thought they knew about 1940s automotive technology. "Here's where the main fuel distributor was mounted," she continued, indicating a circular area on the engine block where bolt holes were arranged in a perfect hexagonal pattern, and these smaller holes would have been for the individual cylinder fuel lines. Stephen found himself studying his daughter with new eyes, seeing not just the child he had raised, but a young woman with technical knowledge that exceeded his own decades of experience. The books in Eleanor's collection had apparently contained information that went far beyond typical automotive repair manuals. Caldwell's patience finally snapped. "This is ridiculous. You're all letting a teenager's overactive imagination turn a simple documentation project into some kind of conspiracy theory." "Then explain this," Chloe said calmly, pointing to an area near the base of the engine block where the metal had been carefully polished to remove what appeared to be stamped markings. Arthur knelt beside her, running his calloused fingers over the smooth aluminum surface. "Someone definitely removed identification marks here. You can feel where the metal was ground down and refinished." "Why would someone remove serial numbers and identification marks?" Ethan asked, his young voice filled with genuine curiosity. "Because they didn't want anyone to know what this engine really was," Chloe replied, her hands now exploring the edges of the polished area with methodical precision. She worked at the metal with her fingernail, scraping away decades of accumulated grime and oxidation from the microscopic crevices that remained despite the careful polishing. Gradually, the faint outlines of numbers and letters began to emerge, etched so deeply into the original casting that complete removal would have required cutting away significant material. "I can see part of a serial number," she announced, her voice tight with concentration. "TU something, 7, maybe a 9. Stephen grabbed a flashlight from his workbench and aimed it at the area Chloe was examining. The additional light revealed more details, shadows and highlights that made the hidden markings more visible. "Tucker Experimental 7... something?" Arthur read slowly, his voice filled with amazement. "This isn't just any Tucker engine. This is from their experimental program." Caldwell moved quickly toward the engine, but Stephen stepped into his path with surprising firmness. "Mr. Caldwell, I think it's time you explained exactly what you know about this engine's history." "I don't owe you any explanations," Caldwell replied, but his voice lacked its earlier authority. "This is my property, acquired through legitimate business channels." Chloe continued her examination of the hidden markings, her young eyes better adapted to detecting subtle details than the adults around her. "There's more text here. It looks like property of something. The next word is too damaged to read." She shifted her position, trying different angles to catch the light on the barely visible etchings. Her persistence was rewarded when she discovered additional markings that had been missed during the original removal attempt. "E. Baker," she read aloud, her voice filled with sudden confusion. "It says, property of E. Baker." The garage fell, silent except for the distant hum of traffic on Industrial Avenue. Everyone stared at the engine, then at Chloe, then at Stephen, as the implications of what she had discovered began to sink in. "Eleanor Baker," Stephen whispered, his voice barely audible. "My wife's maiden name was Eleanor Baker." Arthur's face had gone pale. "Stephen, are you saying your wife might have had some connection to this engine?" "I don't know," Stephen replied honestly, his mind racing through memories of conversations with Eleanor about her family history. "She never mentioned anything about working with Tucker Corporation. Her family was from Pennsylvania, but I thought they were farmers." Chloe looked up from the engine, her green eyes bright with excitement and confusion. "Dad, where exactly did Grandma Eleanor's family live?" "Near Pittsburgh, I think. She mentioned growing up around industrial areas, but she never talked much about the specific work her family did." The pieces of a puzzle were beginning to form a picture, but the image was still unclear and filled with gaps. Chloe returned to her examination of the engine, her hands now moving with even greater purpose as she searched for additional clues about her grandmother's mysterious connection to this revolutionary machine. "Look at this," she said, pointing to an area near the oil pan where a small metal plate had been welded to the engine block. The plate was partially hidden beneath layers of grime and paint, but careful cleaning revealed engraved text. Arthur produced a wire brush from his tool collection and carefully cleaned the small plate while everyone watched with growing anticipation. As the accumulated dirt fell away, words began to emerge in precise professional engraving. "Prototype 7, E.M. Baker, Chief Engineer, Special Projects Division." Arthur read aloud, his voice filled with amazement. Stephen felt the world shift beneath his feet. "Chief Engineer? Eleanor never mentioned being an engineer. She always said she worked in administrative positions during the war." "Maybe she had reasons for keeping that information private," Chloe suggested gently, her young wisdom surprising the adults around her. Caldwell had been listening to this revelation with growing agitation, his face cycling through expressions of anger, fear, and calculation. "This changes nothing. Whatever historical connections you think you've found, this engine is still my property. Actually, Arthur said slowly, his experienced legal knowledge coming into play, if this engine was legitimately the property of Eleanor Baker and she was Chloe's grandmother, there might be inheritance issues to consider. That's ridiculous, Caldwell snapped. I have clear title to this engine. I purchased it from a legitimate collector who had owned it for decades. Chloe had moved to another section of the engine where she discovered additional modifications that seemed even more advanced than the fuel injection system. Dad, look at this ignition system. These aren't spark plugs. Stephen examined the unusual components his daughter had found. Instead of traditional spark plugs, the engine featured sophisticated ignition devices that seemed to incorporate multiple electrodes and complex internal structures. These look almost like... Stephen paused, struggling to find the right comparison. Plasma ignition systems, Chloe finished for him. They use high-energy electrical discharge to ignite the fuel mixture more efficiently than conventional spark plugs. The technology existed in the 1940s for laboratory applications, but it was never implemented in automotive engines. Ethan shook his head in bewilderment. Chloe, how do you know about plasma ignition systems? That's graduate-level automotive. Engineering, Grandma Eleanor's books, Chloe replied simply. She had technical journals from the war years that covered experimental propulsion systems. I read them because they were interesting, not because I thought they were connected to our family. The revelations were coming too fast for anyone to fully process. Stephen found himself looking at his daughter with a mixture of pride and confusion, realizing that Eleanor had left behind a legacy of knowledge that went far beyond what anyone in the family had understood. Caldwell's agitation had reached a breaking point. I'm ending this right now. Whatever games you people think you're playing, whatever historical fantasies you're constructing, this engine belongs to me, and I'm removing it from your shop. He gestured sharply to his assistants, who began moving toward the platform supporting the engine, but Arthur stepped forward with surprising speed and authority, placing himself between the assistants and their target. Hold on there, Arthur said firmly. If this engine was stolen from Eleanor Baker or obtained under false pretenses, then Mr. Caldwell's ownership might not be as clear as he claims. You have no legal standing to prevent me from removing my property, Caldwell replied. But his voice carried less conviction than before. Chloe looked up from her continued examination of the engine, her young face serious beyond her years. Mr. Caldwell, how did you know to bring this engine specifically to our shop? Out of all the automotive repair facilities in Ohio, why did you choose Baker Auto Repair? The question hung in the air like an accusation. Caldwell's face flushed, red, and his hands clenched into fists at his sides. That's irrelevant. I researched local shops and chose one that seemed appropriate for the documentary. But we're not famous, Stephen interjected, understanding dawning in his voice. We're struggling to stay in business. If you wanted to showcase small-town mechanics, there are much more successful shops you could have chosen. Chloe's green eyes fixed on Caldwell with unsettling directness. You didn't choose us randomly. You know something about our family's connection to this engine. The film crew continued recording, their cameras capturing every nuance of the confrontation that had evolved from a simple restoration challenge into something much more complex and potentially explosive. The assistant with the clipboard looked increasingly nervous, sensing that the documentary had veered far from its intended script. Caldwell's composure was cracking like ice under pressure. I don't have to justify my business decisions to a bunch of small-town mechanics and a teenager with delusions of grandeur. But Chloe had returned to the engine one final time, her hands exploring an area she had not yet examined thoroughly. Her fingers found a hidden compartment built into the engine block itself, so cleverly concealed that it appeared to be part of the original casting. "There's something inside here," she announced, her voice filled with excitement and anticipation. Chloe's fingers worked carefully around the edges of the hidden compartment, searching for a mechanism that would allow access without damaging whatever might be concealed inside. The adults crowded around her, their breathing shallow with anticipation as she explored the ingenious engineering that had kept secrets buried for over 7 decades. The compartment was built into the engine block with extraordinary precision, its edges sealed so perfectly that detecting it required both technical knowledge and exceptional observational skills. The aluminum casting had been machined to create a hollow space that appeared solid from every external angle, a feat of engineering that demonstrated remarkable foresight and planning. "It feels like there's a release mechanism," Chloe murmured, her fingertips detecting subtle variations in the metal surface that indicated moving parts. Someone designed this to be opened, but only by someone who knew exactly where to look. Stephen watched his daughter work with growing amazement, recognizing in her methodical approach the same careful precision that Eleanor had brought to every task she undertook. The connection between grandmother and granddaughter was becoming more apparent with each passing moment. Caldwell's agitation had reached a fever pitch. His expensive suit was wrinkled from nervous movement, and perspiration had begun to stain his collar despite the cool garage air. "This is taking too long. I'm calling the police to report theft if you don't stop interfering with my property." "Go ahead," Arthur replied calmly, not taking his eyes off Chloe's work. "I'd be interested to hear you explain to Officer Thompson how you happened to bring stolen property to the very shop owned by the original owner's family." A soft click echoed through the garage as Chloe found the hidden release mechanism. A section of the engine block shifted slightly, revealing a perfectly fitted door that had been invisible moments before. The engineering was so sophisticated that even knowing where to look, the casual observer would struggle to detect the compartment's existence. "It's open," Chloe breathed, her voice filled with wonder at the mechanical precision her grandmother had achieved. Inside the compartment lay a collection of documents wrapped in waterproof material that had protected them from decades of exposure to engine fluids and environmental contamination. The package was small but substantial, clearly containing materials that someone had considered important enough to hide in such an elaborate manner. Chloe carefully extracted the package, her hands trembling slightly as she realized she was touching something her grandmother had placed there more than 70 years ago. The waterproof wrapper was made from military-grade material, suggesting that Eleanor Baker had access to sophisticated preservation techniques. "Should we open it here?" Stephen asked, his voice filled with uncertainty about disturbing something that had been deliberately concealed for so long. "Yes," Chloe replied without hesitation. "Grandma Eleanor hid this for a reason. Maybe she meant for it to be found someday." With careful precision, Chloe unwrapped the package, revealing a collection of blueprints, technical drawings, and handwritten notes that had been perfectly preserved by their protective covering. The papers were yellowed with age, but completely readable, their contents immediately recognizable as sophisticated engineering documentation. Arthur whistled low as he examined the visible portions of the documents. "These are professional-grade engineering drawings. Look at the precision of these technical specifications." The blueprints showed detailed schematics for engine modifications that went far beyond anything the automotive industry had implemented in the 1940s. The drawings included mathematical calculations, stress analysis diagrams, and performance, and projections that demonstrated extraordinary technical sophistication. "This is incredible," Ethan said, studying the documents over Chloe's shoulder. These modifications would increase fuel efficiency by more than 40% compared to conventional engines of that era. Chloe spread the documents carefully on Stephen's workbench, revealing layer after layer of technical innovation that challenged everything the adults thought they knew about 1940s automotive technology. Each blueprint built upon the others, creating a comprehensive system for revolutionizing engine performance. "Look at this fuel injection design," she said, pointing to a detailed schematic that showed mechanical fuel metering systems of extraordinary complexity. It's decades ahead of anything that was commercially available. The precision required for manufacturing these components would have been almost impossible with 1940s technology. Stephen found himself staring at handwriting he recognized, though he had never seen it applied to technical subjects. Eleanor's careful script filled the margins of the blueprints with notes and calculations that demonstrated deep understanding of advanced engineering principles. "Your grandmother wrote all this?" he asked, his voice filled with amazement and confusion. "She must have," Chloe replied, studying the handwritten notes with growing excitement. "Look at these calculations. She's working out thermal efficiency, improvements, combustion optimization, even emission reduction strategies. This is graduate-level automotive engineering." One document in particular caught everyone's attention. It was a formal letter on Tucker Corporation letterhead, addressed to Eleanor M. Baker and signed by Preston Tucker himself. The letter praised her innovative work and authorized her to proceed with prototype development for what was described as revolutionary efficiency enhancements. Arthur read the letter aloud, his gravelly voice filled with respect for the technical achievements it described. "Miss Baker, your fuel efficiency modifications have exceeded our most optimistic projections. Authorization is granted for prototype 7 implementation with full corporate support. The potential applications for this technology extend far beyond civilian automotive use." "Military applications," Ethan said quietly, understanding the implications of Tucker's final comment. Caldwell had been listening to these revelations with growing desperation, his face cycling through expressions of anger, fear, and calculation. "None of this matters. These are just old papers with no legal significance. I still own that engine." But Chloe had found another document that changed everything. It was an official patent application filed by Eleanor Baker with the United States Patent Office, describing the fuel efficiency technology and claiming intellectual property rights to the innovations. The application was dated 6 months before the mysterious engine failure that had destroyed the prototype. "She filed for patents," Chloe announced, her voice filled with triumph. Grandma Eleanor owned the intellectual property rights to these innovations. Stephen felt a profound shift in his understanding of the woman he had married and lost. Eleanor had never mentioned her technical background, always describing her wartime work in modest terms that understated her contributions. The evidence before him revealed a hidden genius whose innovations had been deliberately suppressed. "Why didn't she ever tell me about this?" Stephen asked, his voice filled with pain and confusion. Arthur placed a gentle hand on his friend's shoulder. "Maybe she had reasons for keeping it quiet. Look at what happened to this engine, Stephen. Someone went to great lengths to make sure. This technology never saw the light of day. The implications were staggering. Eleanor Baker had developed revolutionary automotive technology in the 1940s, technology that could have transformed the industry and reduced fuel consumption by unprecedented amounts. But instead of being implemented, it had been hidden, sabotaged, and buried for over 70 years. Chloe continued examining the documents, finding additional evidence of the scope of Eleanor's work. She wasn't just working on fuel efficiency. Look at these drawings for emissions control systems, advanced transmission designs, even early concepts for hybrid powertrains. "Hybrid powertrains in 1947?" Ethan asked, his voice filled with disbelief. Electric motor assist for acceleration and hill climbing, Chloe explained, pointing to detailed schematics that showed electric motors integrated with conventional engines. The technology existed, but the automotive industry wasn't ready to implement it. Caldwell's composure finally shattered completely. "This is enough. You people are in possession of stolen corporate documents and proprietary technology. I'm calling my lawyers and having all of you arrested." But his threats rang hollow in the face of the mounting evidence. The documents clearly established Eleanor Baker's ownership of the technology and her family's inheritance rights to both. The intellectual property and the physical engine that embodied her innovations. "Mr. Caldwell," Stephen said quietly, his voice carrying new authority born from understanding his wife's legacy, "I think it's time you explained exactly how you acquired this engine and what you know about my wife's work." The film crew continued recording, their cameras capturing every moment of what had become a dramatic confrontation between powerful corporate interests and a working-class family discovering their hidden heritage. The assistant with the clipboard had long since abandoned any pretense of following a predetermined script. Chloe had found one final document that tied everything together. It was a memorandum from Tucker Corporation's board of directors ordering the immediate termination of Eleanor Baker's Special Projects Division and the destruction of all prototype engines and documentation related to her efficiency improvements. "They shut down her project," she said, her young voice filled with indignation. "The board ordered everything destroyed just 3 months before Tucker Corporation went out of business." Arthur studied the memorandum with growing anger. This wasn't about technical problems or financial issues. Someone wanted to make sure this technology never reached the market. The evidence painted a clear picture of corporate sabotage and deliberate suppression of revolutionary automotive technology. Eleanor Baker's innovations had threatened established interests, leading to the destruction of her work and the burial of knowledge that could have transformed the industry. Stephen looked at his daughter with new eyes, seeing in her not just the child he had raised, but the inheritor of a legacy of genius and innovation that had been hidden for decades. "Chloe, do you understand what this means?" "It means Grandma Eleanor was a revolutionary engineer whose work was suppressed because it threatened powerful people," Chloe replied with mature understanding that surprised everyone. "And it means this engine isn't broken at all. It was sabotaged." To hide what it could do, Caldwell made one last desperate attempt to regain control of the situation. "Even if those documents are authentic, which I doubt, the statute of limitations on any patent claims expired decades ago. You have no legal grounds to challenge my ownership." But Arthur had been thinking about the legal implications of their discoveries. "Actually, Gregory, if the original patents were never properly adjudicated due to corporate fraud and sabotage, there might be grounds for reopening the intellectual property claims." The garage had become a battleground between past and present, between suppressed innovation and corporate power, between a working-class family and the forces that had tried to bury their heritage. And at the center of it all stood a 16-year-old girl who had inherited her grandmother's genius and was determined to see justice done. "We're going to fix this engine," Chloe announced with quiet determination. "We're going to prove that Grandma Eleanor's technology works exactly like she designed it to." The determination in Chloe's voice galvanized everyone in the garage. Stephen felt a surge of pride mixed with protective concern as he watched his 16-year-old daughter study Eleanor's blueprints with the focused intensity of a master craftsman. The technical drawings spread across his workbench represented not just automotive innovation, but a family legacy that had been deliberately hidden from them. Arthur moved to examine the damaged engine components more closely, his weathered hands, tracing the sabotage marks with newfound understanding. If we're really going to attempt this restoration, we'll need to fabricate replacement parts based on these original specifications. That's going to require precision machining that's beyond what most shops can handle. Ethan pulled out his cell phone, scrolling through his contacts with growing excitement. My Uncle Mike runs a machine shop in Philadelphia. He specializes in vintage aircraft restoration and has equipment that can handle the tolerances we'll need. Caldwell watched these preparations with increasing agitation, his expensive shoes clicking nervously on the concrete floor as he paced near the garage entrance. His film crew had stopped pretending to follow a script, their cameras now documenting what had become a genuine historical discovery rather than staged entertainment. "You people are delusional if you think you can restore that engine," Caldwell declared, his voice carrying a desperate edge. "Even if those blueprints are authentic, the manufacturing techniques required to build those components don't exist anymore." Chloe looked up from her study of the fuel injection schematics, her green eyes bright with confidence that surprised everyone. Actually, modern precision machining is far more advanced than what was available in the 1940s. The challenge isn't the manufacturing capability, it's understanding exactly what Grandma Eleanor designed. She pointed to a detailed drawing that showed the fuel metering system's internal components. These tolerances are incredibly tight, but they're within the capabilities of current CNC machining equipment. The real innovation is in the design principles, not the manufacturing technology. Stephen found himself looking at the blueprints with new appreciation for both his wife's genius and his daughter's technical understanding. The complexity of Eleanor's designs was staggering, incorporating principles that wouldn't become mainstream in the automotive industry for decades after her work was suppressed. The sound of vehicles pulling into the parking area interrupted their discussion. Through the grimy windows, they could see Frank Davis climbing out of his pickup truck, followed by Officer Carol Thompson in her patrol car. Behind them came Maria Parker from the diner, her worried expression suggesting that word of the confrontation had spread through the tight-knit community. Frank Davis entered the garage with the confident stride of someone who belonged there, his coveralls bearing the same honest stains of automotive work that marked Stephen's clothing. At 62, Frank had been Stephen's competitor and friend. For over 2 decades, their rivalry tempered by mutual respect and shared struggles in the challenging automotive repair business. "Stephen, what the hell is going on here?" Frank asked, his eyes taking in the expensive film equipment, the covered engine, and the obvious tension between the Baker family and their well-dressed visitors. "Maria called and said there was some kind of trouble at your shop." Officer Carol Thompson followed Frank into the garage, her hand resting casually on her duty belt as she assessed the situation. At 45, Carol had been patrolling Clearwater for 15 years and knew every family in town. Her presence brought an official authority that immediately changed the dynamic in the room. "Is there a problem here that requires police intervention?" Carol asked, her professional tone making it clear that she was prepared to take action if necessary. Caldwell seized the opportunity to reassert his authority. "Officer, these people are refusing to return my property and making wild claims about stolen documents and corporate conspiracies. I want them arrested for theft and harassment." Carol's expression remained neutral as she looked around the garage, taking in the scattered blueprints, the damaged engine, and the obvious technical work that had been in progress. "Mr. Baker, what's your side of this situation?" Stephen quickly explained the morning's events, from Caldwell's arrival with the documentary crew to Chloe's discovery of Eleanor's hidden engineering legacy. As he spoke, Carol's expression shifted from professional skepticism to genuine interest, particularly when he mentioned the patent documents and Eleanor's connection to Tucker Corporation. "So you're saying this engine legally belonged to your late wife?" Carol asked, her understanding of the legal implications immediately grasping the core issue. That's what the documentation suggests, Arthur interjected, holding up the patent applications and Tucker Corporation correspondence. Eleanor Baker filed legitimate patent claims for this technology, and there's evidence that corporate interests deliberately sabotaged her work. Caldwell's face flushed red with anger and desperation. This is ridiculous. I have clear title to that engine, purchased through legitimate channels. These people are construction elaborate fantasies based on old papers they found in an attic. But Carol had noticed something that changed her entire perspective on the situation. Mr. Caldwell, I'm going to need to see your identification and any documentation proving your ownership of this engine. As Caldwell reluctantly produced his driver's license and business cards, Chloe had returned to her examination of Eleanor's blueprints, her young mind working through the technical challenges of implementing designs that were decades ahead of their time. "Dad, look at this," she said, pointing to a series of calculations in Eleanor's handwriting. She worked out the thermal dynamics for optimal combustion efficiency based on fuel injection timing that varies with engine load and temperature. Ethan studied the calculations over her shoulder, his mechanical training helping him understand the sophistication of Eleanor's approach. This is adaptive fuel management. Modern engines use computer systems to achieve what she designed with pure mechanical engineering. Frank Davis had been listening to these technical discussions with growing amazement. "Stephen, are you telling me that Eleanor was some kind of automotive genius? She never mentioned anything about engineering when I knew her." "That seems to be a pattern," Stephen replied, his voice filled with sadness and pride. "She kept this part of her life completely separate from everything else. I'm starting to understand why." Carol finished examining Caldwell's identification and turned to address the group. "Mr. Caldwell, your driver's license shows a New York address, but your business cards list a Delaware corporation. I'm going to need more substantial documentation before I can determine the legitimacy of your ownership claims." Caldwell's composure was cracking under the pressure of official scrutiny. "I don't have to justify my business arrangements to a small-town police officer. This is a matter for federal courts and corporate lawyers." "Actually," Carol replied calmly, "theft and fraud are state crimes that fall under my jurisdiction. And if these folks have legitimate claims to this property, your removal of it could constitute theft under Ohio law." The legal implications were becoming clearer, and Caldwell's position was weakening with each passing moment. His expensive suit and arrogant demeanor were no longer sufficient to intimidate people who had right and law on their side. Maria Parker had been quietly observing the confrontation from near the garage entrance, but she stepped forward when she heard Eleanor's name mentioned in connection with engineering work. "Stephen, I remember Eleanor talking about her work during the war. Years. She was always vague about the details, but she mentioned working on vehicle improvements for the military. The community support was building organically, drawn by loyalty to the Baker family and suspicion of outsiders who threatened their neighbors." Frank Davis positioned himself closer to the engine, his body language making it clear that any attempt to remove it would face physical resistance. Chloe had begun organizing Eleanor's blueprints in order of implementation complexity, her technical analysis revealing a systematic approach to engine modification that demonstrated extraordinary engineering foresight. "We should start with the fuel injection system components," she announced. "They're the foundation for everything else." Arthur nodded approvingly. "Smart thinking. Get the fuel delivery working properly, then move on to the ignition timing and thermal management systems." Caldwell realized that his position was becoming untenable. The combination of legal questions, community opposition, and mounting evidence of the Baker family's legitimate claims had destroyed his ability to simply take the engine and leave. "This isn't over," he declared, pulling out his cell phone with aggressive determination. "I'm calling my corporate legal team. You people have no idea who you're dealing with." As Caldwell stepped outside to make his calls, Carol moved closer to examine the blueprints and patent documents that had been discovered. Her expression showed growing respect for the technical sophistication Eleanor had achieved decades before such innovations became commercially available. "Stephen, these documents could be historically significant beyond their legal implications," Carol said thoughtfully. "If your wife developed this technology in the 1940s and it was deliberately suppressed, that's a story that deserves to be told." Chloe looked up from her study of the fuel injection schematics, her young face serious. "With purpose. Officer Thompson, what would happen if we could prove that this technology was stolen and suppressed by powerful corporations?" Carol considered the question carefully. "If there's evidence of criminal conspiracy to steal intellectual property and suppress innovation that could involve federal investigators and congressional oversight committees, the implications were staggering. What had begun as a simple engine restoration challenge was evolving into a potential investigation of corporate malfeasance that spanned decades and involved the deliberate suppression of technology that could have transformed the automotive industry. Through the garage windows, they could see Caldwell pacing urgently as he spoke on his phone, his animated gestures suggesting that his conversations were not going well. Whatever corporate backing he had expected was apparently not materializing as quickly as he had hoped. "We need to document everything," Arthur said firmly. "Every blueprint, every calculation, every piece of evidence. If this turns into a legal battle, we'll need proof that can't be disputed." Ethan had already begun photographing the blueprints with his phone, creating digital backups of Eleanor's engineering legacy. "I'm sending copies to my Uncle Mike so he can start evaluating the machining requirements for the replacement components." Chloe returned to her examination of the damaged engine, now seeing it not as an impossible restoration challenge, but as a puzzle her grandmother had designed to be solved by someone with the right knowledge and determination. Eleanor's hidden legacy was finally emerging from decades of suppression, carried forward by a granddaughter who had inherited both her technical genius and her determination to see justice done. Grandma Eleanor didn't hide this technology to keep it secret forever, Chloe said quietly. She hid it so it could be found when the time was right. The afternoon sun streamed through the garage windows as Chloe carefully removed the first damaged component from the Tucker engine, her small hands working with the precision of a surgeon. Eleanor's blueprints lay spread across multiple workbenches, their technical details serving as a roadmap for restoration work that would have challenged teams of professional engineers. Stephen watched his daughter work with a mixture of pride and amazement, seeing in her methodical approach the same careful attention to detail that Eleanor had brought to every project she undertook. The connection between grandmother and granddaughter was becoming more apparent with each calculated movement. Arthur had positioned himself at the main workbench, carefully cataloging each removed component and comparing its condition to Eleanor's original specifications. His weathered hands moved with the respect of someone handling historical artifacts rather than mere mechanical parts. "This fuel rail is machined to tolerances that were practically impossible to achieve in 1947, Arthur observed, examining a component through a magnifying glass. The precision required for these internal passages would have pushed the limits of available manufacturing technology. Ethan returned from his phone conversation with his Uncle Mike, his young face animated with excitement and technical information. Uncle Mike says he can fabricate the replacement components, but he wants to examine the original parts first to understand the manufacturing techniques Eleanor used. The sound of expensive vehicles arriving in the parking area drew everyone's attention to the windows. A convoy of black sedans had joined Caldwell's original SUVs, their occupants emerging with the purposeful movements of people accustomed to wielding corporate power and legal authority. Frank Davis positioned himself near the garage entrance, his body language making it clear that any uninvited visitors would face resistance. Looks like Caldwell called in reinforcements, 3 men in $1,000 suits and a woman carrying enough legal documents to choke a horse. Officer Carol Thompson checked her radio and moved to a position where she could observe both the engine restoration work and the arriving corporate representatives. Her professional training told her that the situation was escalating beyond a simple property dispute into something with broader implications. "Stephen, I'm going to call for backup," Carol said quietly. "If this turns into a legal confrontation, I want sufficient documentation and witness protection." The corporate team entered the garage with the aggressive confidence of people who were accustomed to getting their way through intimidation and legal pressure. The lead attorney, a sharp-featured woman in her 50s, immediately began photographing the engine and blueprints with professional equipment. "Mr. Baker, I'm Patricia Whitman, Senior Counsel for Caldwell Automotive Holdings," the attorney announced, her voice carrying the authority of expensive legal education and corporate backing. "We're here to resolve this situation immediately and prevent any further interference with our client's property." Behind her stood 2 men who radiated the quiet menace of corporate security professionals, their expensive suits doing little to disguise their function as enforcers rather than negotiators. Their presence immediately changed the atmosphere in the garage from tense to potentially dangerous. Caldwell emerged from his phone conversations with renewed confidence, apparently bolstered by the arrival of his corporate support team. "Patricia, these people are in possession of my engine and are making fraudulent claims based on forged documents." But Chloe had been listening to these exchanges while continuing her methodical work on the engine components, her young mind processing not just the technical challenges, but the broader implications of the corporate response. The level of resources being deployed suggested that the stakes were far higher than anyone had initially understood. "Dad, look at this," she said, holding up a component she had just removed from the engine's fuel system. "This isn't just advanced engineering for 1947, it's advanced engineering for today." The fuel injector in her hands was a masterpiece of precision manufacturing, its internal components arranged with mathematical precision that demonstrated understanding of fluid dynamics decades ahead of its time. The tolerances were so tight that modern manufacturing equipment would be challenged to replicate them. Arthur studied the component with growing amazement. "Chloe's right. This level of precision shouldn't have been possible with 1940s machining technology. Eleanor must have developed manufacturing techniques that were never documented or shared." Patricia Whitman moved aggressively toward the workbench, her camera capturing detailed images of the component and the surrounding blueprints. "Whatever technical fantasies you're constructing, this engine and all associated documentation are the legal property of Caldwell Automotive Holdings." But Frank Davis stepped between the attorney and the workbench, his calloused hands crossed over his chest in a gesture that brooked no argument. "Lady, you're in Stephen's shop looking at his family's property. I suggest you back off before this gets unpleasant." The confrontation was interrupted by the arrival of additional vehicles outside the garage. Through the windows, they could see a van marked with television station logos and several cars carrying people with notebooks and cameras. Word of the discovery had apparently spread beyond the immediate community. Carol Thompson stepped outside to manage the growing crowd, her radio crackling with reports of increasing media interest and requests for additional police presence. What had begun as a simple property dispute was evolving into a public spectacle with historical and legal implications. Inside the garage, Chloe had made another discovery that changed everyone's understanding of Eleanor's work. Hidden beneath layers of protective coating on one of the engine components, she found additional technical markings that revealed the true scope of her grandmother's innovations. "There are part numbers here that reference other engines," she announced, carefully cleaning away decades of accumulated grime to reveal the hidden markings. Grandma Eleanor wasn't just working on one experimental engine. This was part of a series. The implications were staggering. Eleanor Baker's work hadn't been limited to a single prototype, but represented a comprehensive program of automotive innovation that had been systematically suppressed. The numbers suggested that dozens of experimental engines had been built and tested. Stephen felt a chill as he realized the magnitude of what his wife had been involved in and the forces that had worked to bury her contributions. "Chloe, what else do those part numbers tell us?" "They reference different applications," she replied, studying the markings with growing excitement. "Passenger vehicles, trucks, even marine engines. Grandma Eleanor was developing efficiency improvements for the entire transportation industry." Patricia Whitman had been documenting these discoveries with increasing urgency, her camera capturing every detail while she spoke rapidly into a wireless headset. Her conversations suggested that the corporate response was being coordinated. At the highest levels, Arthur had found additional documentation among Eleanor's papers that supported Chloe's analysis. Here's a memorandum discussing fuel efficiency improvements for military transport vehicles. The projected savings in fuel consumption were enormous. The economic implications were becoming clear. Eleanor's innovations could have reduced fuel consumption across the entire transportation sector by percentages that would have saved billions of dollars and reduced environmental impact by unprecedented amounts. The suppression of such technology represented not just corporate greed, but a betrayal of public interest. Ethan looked up from his phone, his face grave with new information. "Uncle Mike just called back. He's been researching historical records about Tucker Corporation's closure. There's evidence that several automotive companies coordinated to suppress Tucker's innovations because they threatened established market positions. The conspiracy was broader than anyone had imagined, involving multiple corporations working together to prevent revolutionary technology from reaching the market." Eleanor Baker's work had been caught up in an industry-wide effort to maintain the status quo at the expense of innovation and efficiency. Outside, the media presence was growing as reporters recognized the historical significance of what was unfolding in the small garage. Television crews were setting up equipment while print journalists interviewed community members about the Baker family and their connection to automotive history. Carol Thompson returned to the garage with additional officers and a grim expression that suggested the situation was becoming more complex than local authorities could handle. "Stephen, I've been in contact with the state police and federal investigators. If there's evidence of interstate commerce violations or historical fraud, this could become a federal case." Caldwell's confidence wavered as he realized that his corporate backing might not be sufficient to suppress a story that was already attracting national attention. The arrival of federal investigators would bring resources and authority that even his expensive legal team couldn't easily counter. Chloe had continued working throughout the confrontations, her focus on the technical challenges serving as an anchor for everyone else's growing anxiety. Her steady progress in understanding Eleanor's innovations provided hope that the engine could actually be restored to working condition. "I think I understand how the fuel injection system works," she announced, holding up a series of components that she had carefully cleaned and examined. "It's not just mechanical fuel metering, it's a complete engine management system that optimizes performance in real time." The technical achievement was extraordinary. representing a level of automotive sophistication that wouldn't become commercially available for decades after Eleanor's work was suppressed. The implications for fuel efficiency and emissions reduction were staggering. Stephen found himself looking at his daughter with new eyes, seeing in her not just the child he had raised, but the inheritor of a legacy that could transform the automotive industry if properly understood and implemented. Patricia. Whitman made one final attempt to reassert corporate control over the situation. Regardless of these historical claims, Mr. Caldwell has clear legal title to this engine. Any attempt to prevent its removal constitutes theft under federal law. But Arthur had been studying the patent documents with the careful attention of someone who understood their legal implications. Actually, Patricia, if these patents were fraudulently voided and the technology stolen, then Caldwell's title might be based on receipt of stolen property. The legal foundation of Caldwell's ownership was crumbling under examination, and the growing media attention made it impossible to resolve the dispute through intimidation or corporate pressure. The truth about Eleanor Baker's innovations was emerging despite decades of suppression. Chloe looked up from her work, her green eyes bright with determination and technical understanding. The technical achievement was extraordinary, representing a level of automotive sophistication that wouldn't become commercially available for decades after Eleanor's work was suppressed. The implications for fuel efficiency and emissions reduction were staggering. Stephen found himself looking at his daughter with new eyes, seeing in her not just the child he had raised, but the inheritor of a legacy that could transform the automotive industry if properly understood and implemented. Patricia. Whitman made one final attempt to reassert corporate control over the situation. Regardless of these historical claims, Mr. Caldwell has clear legal title to this engine. Any attempt to prevent its removal constitutes theft under federal law. But Arthur had been studying the patent documents with the careful attention of someone who understood their legal implications. Actually, Patricia, if these patents were fraudulently voided and the technology stolen, then Caldwell's title might be based on receipt of stolen property. The legal foundation of Caldwell's ownership was crumbling under examination, and the growing media attention made it impossible to resolve the dispute through intimidation or corporate pressure. The truth about Eleanor Baker's innovations was emerging despite decades of suppression. Chloe looked up from her work, her green eyes bright with determination and technical understanding that amazed everyone present. We're going to finish this restoration. We're going to prove that Grandma Eleanor's technology works exactly like she designed it to. The engine that had been declared impossible to repair was slowly revealing its secrets to a 16-year-old girl who had inherited both the technical knowledge and moral courage necessary to restore her grandmother's legacy. The evening news trucks had transformed the quiet street outside Baker Auto Repair into a media circus, their satellite dishes and bright lights turning the humble garage into the center of national attention. Inside, Chloe worked with unwavering focus, her small hands assembling components that embodied decades of suppressed automotive innovation. Professor William Turner arrived just as the sun was setting, his academic credentials and reputation in automotive engineering lending immediate credibility to the Baker family's claims. At 62, Turner had spent his career studying the evolution of engine technology, making him uniquely qualified to evaluate Eleanor's revolutionary designs. "Mr. Baker, I drove here as soon as I saw the news reports," Turner said, his voice filled with excitement and professional curiosity. "If these blueprints are authentic, they represent one of the most significant discoveries in automotive history." Stephen wiped his grease-stained hands on a rag before shaking the professor's hand, still struggling to process how his quiet family life had exploded into this maelstrom of technical discovery and legal confrontation. "Professor Turner, I appreciate "You coming? To be honest, we're in over our heads here." Turner moved immediately to examine Eleanor's blueprints, his trained eye scanning the technical drawings with the intensity of someone who understood their full implications. His expression shifted from curiosity to amazement as he studied the sophisticated engineering principles Eleanor had implemented decades before they became standard practice. "These calculations are extraordinary," Turner murmured, tracing Eleanor's handwritten notes with reverent fingers. "She's working out thermal efficiency equations that weren't formally developed until the 1970s. And this fuel injection design, it's more sophisticated than systems we use today." Chloe looked up from her painstaking work on the rebuilt fuel metering assembly, her young face smudged with grease but bright with determination. "Professor Turner, could you help me understand this timing calculation? Grandma Eleanor's math shows optimal injection points that seem to vary with engine temperature." Turner knelt beside her, studying the components she had been assembling, with meticulous attention to Eleanor's original specifications. "This is adaptive fuel management, implemented with pure mechanical engineering. Modern engines require computer systems to achieve what your grandmother designed with precision machining and innovative physics. The federal investigators had arrived an hour earlier, their presence adding an official gravity to the situation that made everyone speak in more measured tones. Agent Rebecca Foster, a specialist in corporate fraud and intellectual property theft, had been documenting every aspect of the discovery with professional thoroughness. "Dr. Murphy should be here within the hour," Agent Foster announced, checking her watch as she spoke. "She's driving down from the Smithsonian specifically to examine these documents and provide expert historical analysis." Arthur Jackson had been working alongside Chloe throughout the afternoon, his decades of mechanical experience proving invaluable in understanding Eleanor's complex engineering solutions. "Agent Foster, what happens if we can prove that this technology was deliberately suppressed by corporate conspiracy?" "If we can establish a pattern of fraud and interstate commerce violations, we're looking at potential federal racketeering charges," Foster replied grimly. "The suppression of technology that could have saved billions in fuel costs and reduced environmental damage would constitute massive economic harm." Patricia Whitman had been conducting increasingly urgent phone conversations with her corporate superiors, her confident demeanor gradually eroding as the legal foundation of Caldwell's position continued to weaken. The arrival of federal investigators had transformed what she expected to be a simple property dispute into a potential criminal investigation. Caldwell himself had retreated to his SUV, his expensive suit wrinkled and his silver hair disheveled, as he realized that his carefully planned documentary project had exposed secrets that powerful interests had spent decades keeping buried. "Professor Turner, look at this," Chloe said, holding up the completed fuel injection assembly. "I've rebuilt it exactly according to Grandma Eleanor's specifications. The precision required is incredible, but modern machining made it possible." Turner examined the component with growing amazement, his expert eye recognizing the sophistication of engineering principles that were decades ahead of their time. "Chloe, this represents a quantum leap in fuel delivery technology. If this system works as designed, it could improve engine efficiency by percentages that would revolutionize the automotive industry." The technical validation from a respected academic gave new weight to the Baker family's claims and provided credible expert testimony that would be crucial in any legal proceedings. Turner's reputation in the field made it impossible for corporate interests to dismiss the discovery as amateur speculation. Dr. Patricia Murphy arrived from the Smithsonian Institution just as the garage's fluorescent lights were supplemented by the harsh glare of television crews. As the nation's leading expert on Tucker Corporation history, her analysis would provide definitive authentication of Eleanor's role in automotive innovation. "This is remarkable," Dr. Murphy said as she studied the patent applications and corporate correspondence. "We've had gaps in the Tucker Corporation records that these documents fill perfectly. Eleanor Baker wasn't just an engineer, she was apparently the chief architect of their most advanced experimental programs." Stephen found himself surrounded by experts who were validating everything his daughter had discovered about Eleanor's hidden legacy. The woman he had known as a gentle wife and mother had apparently been one of the most innovative automotive engineers of her generation. Ethan had been monitoring news coverage on his phone, watching as the story spread from local outlets to national networks. The automotive industry is paying attention now. Stock prices are already moving as investors realize the implications of suppressed fuel efficiency technology. The economic ramifications were becoming clear as financial analysts calculated the potential impact of Eleanor's innovations on fuel consumption and environmental protection. The suppression of such technology represented not just corporate greed, but a betrayal of public interest on a massive scale. The scope of the investigation was expanding as investigators realized that Eleanor's work was just one example of suppressed innovation that had been buried to protect established corporate interests. The implications for antitrust law and consumer protection were staggering. Dr. Murphy had found additional evidence in Eleanor's documents that connected her work to other suppressed automotive innovations of the 1940s and 1950s. There's a pattern here of systematic suppression of technologies that could have transformed the industry decades earlier than they were actually implemented. Patricia Whitman made one final attempt to salvage her client's position. "Even if these historical claims are valid, Mr. Caldwell still has legal ownership rights that can't be dismissed by emotional appeals to historical justice." But Arthur had been studying the legal documentation with the careful attention of someone who understood the implications of fraudulent transfer of stolen property. "Patricia, if this engine was obtained through a chain of transactions that originated with theft of intellectual property, then Caldwell's title is legally void." The legal foundation of corporate ownership was crumbling as investigators documented the chain of suppression and theft that had kept Eleanor's innovations buried for over 70 years. The truth was emerging despite decades of cover-up and corporate intimidation. Chloe had completed the installation of the rebuilt ignition system and was now working on the final connections that would integrate all of Eleanor's innovations into a functioning engine. Her technical progress had been steady and methodical, guided by blueprints that revealed their secrets to someone with the knowledge and determination to understand them. "We're almost ready for the first test," she announced, her voice filled with excitement and nervous anticipation. "All the major systems are restored according to Grandma Eleanor's original specifications." Professor Turner examined the nearly completed restoration with professional amazement. "Chloe, you've accomplished something that teams of professional engineers said was impossible. This engine represents a level of innovation that was decades ahead of its time." The technical validation provided powerful evidence that Eleanor Baker's suppressed innovations were not just historically significant, but potentially revolutionary for current automotive technology. The implications for fuel efficiency and environmental protection were enormous. Stephen looked at his daughter with a mixture of pride and amazement, seeing in her not just the child he had raised, but the inheritor of a legacy that could change the automotive industry. Eleanor's hidden genius was finally being revealed through Chloe's technical skill and moral courage. Agent Foster had been coordinating with federal prosecutors and media relations specialists as the story continued to attract national attention. The Justice Department is taking this investigation very seriously. If we can prove systematic suppression of fuel efficiency technology, the implications for consumer protection and environmental law are enormous. The federal involvement had transformed what began as a simple engine restoration into an investigation of corporate fraud and market manipulation, with implications that extended far beyond the Baker family's personal struggle for justice. Chloe made the final connections in Eleanor's revolutionary engine management system, her small hands working with the precision of a master craftsman as she brought decades of suppressed innovation back to life. The moment of truth was approaching when they would discover whether Eleanor's revolutionary technology could actually deliver the performance improvements her calculations promised. The tension in the garage had reached a breaking point as Chloe made the final adjustments to Eleanor's revolutionary engine. Television crews pressed against the windows, while federal investigators documented every detail of what had become the most significant automotive discovery in decades. The weight of history and expectation filled the air like electricity before a storm. Professor Turner double-checked the connections on the fuel injection system, his academic training demanding absolute precision before they attempted to start. An engine that embodied suppressed innovation worth billions of dollars. Chloe, the fuel pressure readings are exactly within Eleanor's specified parameters. This system is more sophisticated than anything commercially available today. Stephen felt his hands trembling as he prepared to connect the battery cables that would bring his wife's hidden legacy back to life after 7 decades of enforced silence. The moment represented not just mechanical restoration, but the vindication of a brilliant woman whose contributions had been deliberately erased from history. Arthur Jackson positioned himself at the engine's monitoring gauges, his weathered face showing the gravity of witnessing something that could reshape the automotive industry. Everyone needs to understand what we're about to see. If this engine performs according to Eleanor's calculations, it proves that fuel efficiency technology was suppressed for corporate profit. Agent Foster had coordinated with federal prosecutors to ensure that every aspect of the engine test was properly documented for potential criminal proceedings. We need clear evidence that this technology delivers the performance improvements claimed in the patent applications. Dr. Murphy stood ready with historical documentation and technical analysis equipment. Her role as the nation's leading Tucker expert lending credibility to whatever they were about to witness. If this engine runs as designed, it validates Eleanor Baker's position as one of the most important automotive engineers in American history. Caldwell had been relegated to the edge of the crowd, his expensive suit wrinkled and his confident demeanor completely shattered. Patricia Whitman stood beside him, speaking urgently into her phone as corporate legal support evaporated in the face of mounting evidence and media scrutiny. "Gregory, my instructions from corporate headquarters are clear," Whitman said, her voice carrying across the garage despite attempts at privacy. "You're on your own. The company cannot afford association with suppressed technology claims and federal fraud investigations." The abandonment by his corporate backing left Caldwell visibly shaken, his silver hair disheveled and his hands trembling as he realized that decades of careful cover-up were unraveling in front of national media coverage. Frank Davis had organized the local community members into a protective perimeter around the garage, their presence serving both as witnesses to history and guardians of the Baker family's moment of vindication. "Stephen, half the county is outside waiting to see justice done." Chloe took a deep breath and looked around at the faces watching her every move. Federal agents, television crews, automotive experts, and community members all focused on a 16-year-old girl who carried the responsibility of proving her grandmother's genius after 70 years of suppression. "Everyone ready?" she asked, her young voice steady despite the enormous pressure of the moment. Stephen nodded and connected the final battery cable, sending electrical power through Eleanor's revolutionary ignition system for the first time since the engine had been sabotaged in 1948. The monitoring gauges immediately came to life, displaying readings that fell precisely within the parameters Eleanor had calculated decades earlier. Chloe placed her hand on the starter switch, feeling the weight of history in the simple mechanical action that would determine whether her grandmother's suppressed innovations could deliver their promised revolution in automotive efficiency. "For Grandma Eleanor," she whispered, and engaged the starter. The engine turned over smoothly, its rebuilt components operating with the precision Eleanor had designed into every system. After several seconds of cranking, the revolutionary fuel injection system delivered its perfectly metered mixture to the advanced combustion chambers. The engine caught and settled into a steady idle that was unlike anything the automotive experts had ever heard. The sound was smooth and controlled, with none of the rough harmonics typical of conventional engines. Eleanor's thermal management system maintained optimal operating temperature, while the sophisticated ignition timing created combustion efficiency that exceeded theoretical projections. Professor Turner stared at the monitoring gauges in amazement, his voice filled with professional awe. "The fuel consumption readings are incredible. This engine is achieving efficiency levels that are 47% better than comparable conventional designs." The numbers were staggering, representing fuel savings that would have saved billions of dollars and prevented massive environmental damage if Eleanor's innovations had been implemented when she developed them in the 1940s. Arthur Jackson monitored the mechanical systems with growing excitement. "Oil pressure, coolant flow, all operating parameters are perfect. This isn't just running, it's running better than any engine I've ever seen." Dr. Murphy documented the successful startup with professional equipment while speaking rapidly into a recording device. The Eleanor Baker engine has successfully demonstrated revolutionary efficiency improvements that validate suppressed automotive technology from 1947. Agent Foster was coordinating with federal investigators and prosecutors as evidence mounted that the suppression of Eleanor's innovations represented massive economic fraud spanning multiple decades. "We're documenting technology that could have transformed the entire transportation industry if it hadn't been deliberately buried." The successful engine test had immediate implications that extended far beyond the Baker family's personal vindication. Financial markets were already responding to news reports about suppressed fuel efficiency technology, with automotive stocks fluctuating as investors calculated the potential impact on established industry practices. Ethan monitored news coverage on his phone as reports of the successful demonstration spread across national media. The automotive industry is scrambling to respond. Several major manufacturers are issuing statements about their commitment to fuel efficiency innovation. The corporate response was predictable, but insufficient to address the growing evidence of systematic suppression that had prevented revolutionary technology from reaching consumers who could have benefited from dramatic improvements in fuel economy. Chloe increased the engine's RPM, testing Eleanor's sophisticated systems under varying load conditions. The revolutionary fuel injection adapted automatically to changing operating parameters, while the advanced ignition timing optimized combustion efficiency at every power level. "Look at these emissions readings," Professor Turner announced, studying data from sophisticated monitoring equipment that had been brought by federal investigators. "This engine is producing cleaner exhaust than modern vehicles equipped with catalytic converters and computer-controlled emissions systems. The environmental implications were as significant as the economic benefits, demonstrating that Eleanor's innovations could have prevented decades of automotive pollution if they had been implemented when she developed them." Stephen found himself looking at the running engine with emotions that ranged from pride in his daughter's technical achievements to grief for his wife's suppressed legacy. Eleanor had carried the burden of knowing that her innovations could transform the world while being forced to remain silent about their potential. The sound of additional vehicles arriving outside indicated that word of the successful demonstration had attracted even more attention from automotive industry representatives and government officials. The implications of Eleanor's technology were too significant to be ignored by anyone involved in transportation policy or automotive manufacturing. Frank. Davis reported on the growing crowd outside the garage. Stephen, there are representatives from 3 major automotive manufacturers out there asking for meetings. The industry can't pretend this technology doesn't exist anymore. The successful engine test had transformed Eleanor Baker from a forgotten engineer into a figure whose suppressed innovations demanded recognition and implementation. The proof of her revolutionary technology made it impossible for corporate interests to continue denying the economic and environmental benefits they had prevented. Agent Foster received updates from federal headquarters as prosecutors evaluated the evidence for potential criminal charges. The Justice Department is treating this as a major case involving interstate commerce fraud and conspiracy to suppress beneficial technology. Chloe continued operating the engine at various speeds and loads, each test providing additional evidence that Eleanor's innovations delivered exactly the performance improvements claimed in the original patent applications. The technology was not just historically significant, but immediately applicable to current automotive challenges. Dr. Murphy had been documenting the technical achievements with equipment that would provide definitive proof of the engine's revolutionary capabilities. This demonstration validates Eleanor Baker's position as one of the most important automotive innovators in American history. Her suppressed technology represents a quantum leap in efficiency that was denied to consumers for over 70 years. Patricia Whitman made one final attempt to salvage something from the corporate disaster unfolding around Caldwell. Even if this technology is historically significant, there are still intellectual property and licensing issues that must be resolved through proper legal channels. But Arthur had been studying the patent documentation with growing understanding of its legal implications. Patricia, if these patents were fraudulently voided and the technology stolen, then any current licensing claims are legally invalid. Eleanor Baker's family owns the legitimate rights to these innovations. The legal foundation for corporate control over Eleanor's technology was crumbling as evidence mounted of the fraud and conspiracy that had kept her innovations buried for decades. The successful demonstration made it impossible to deny the value of what had been suppressed. Chloe brought the engine back to idle speed, its smooth operation providing continuous proof that Eleanor's revolutionary technology was not just theoretically sound but practically superior to anything the automotive industry had implemented in the intervening decades. We've proven that Grandma Eleanor's technology works exactly like she designed it to, Chloe announced, her young voice filled with satisfaction and determination. Now we need to make sure it reaches the people who can benefit from it. The successful restoration and demonstration of Eleanor Baker's suppressed automotive innovations had exposed a conspiracy of corporate suppression that extended far beyond one family's personal struggle for recognition and justice. 3 months later, the transformed Baker Auto Repair bore little resemblance to the struggling garage where Chloe had first encountered Eleanor's hidden legacy. The building had been expanded and modernized, its new sections housing sophisticated testing equipment and research facilities that would have been unimaginable during the dark days when bankruptcy threatened the family business. Stephen stood in the main bay, watching teams of automotive engineers from 3 major manufacturers study Eleanor's revolutionary designs under licensing agreements that had secured his family's financial future, while ensuring that the suppressed technology would finally reach consumers who could benefit from its innovations. The successful prosecution of Gregory Caldwell and his corporate conspirators had made headlines for weeks, with federal courts imposing massive fines and criminal sentences that sent a clear message about the consequences of suppressing beneficial technology. Caldwell himself faced 15 years in federal prison for fraud, conspiracy, and violations of antitrust laws that had cost consumers billions in unnecessary fuel costs. Professor Turner had become a regular presence at the facility, working alongside Chloe to document Eleanor's innovations and develop educational programs that would ensure future engineers understood the historical lessons embedded in the suppressed technology. His academic reputation had lent credibility to the family's claims, while providing scholarly framework for understanding Eleanor's contributions. Chloe, the University of Pennsylvania has finalized your full scholarship package, Turner announced, holding up official documentation that represented educational opportunities far beyond what the family could have imagined just months earlier. They're creating a new automotive engineering program, specifically built around your grandmother's innovations. Chloe looked up from her work on a prototype engine that incorporated Eleanor's efficiency improvements with modern manufacturing techniques. At 16, she had become one of the youngest consultants ever employed by major automotive manufacturers. Her inherited understanding of Eleanor's principles making her invaluable to companies racing to implement the revolutionary technology. Professor Turner, I want to make sure the scholarship includes provisions for research into other suppressed technologies, Chloe replied, her young voice carrying the authority of someone whose technical insights had already changed an entire industry. Grandma Eleanor's work might not be the only innovation that was buried for corporate convenience. The implications of Eleanor's case had indeed opened investigations into other suppressed technologies across multiple industries, with federal agencies examining patterns of innovation suppression that extended far beyond automotive engineering. Chloe's suggestion demonstrated the broader perspective she had developed through her involvement in exposing corporate malfeasance. Arthur Jackson emerged from the testing area where he supervised the construction of engines built to Eleanor's specifications, his weathered face bright with satisfaction at seeing justice finally served after decades of struggle. The veteran mechanic had become the facility's chief technical advisor, his practical experience invaluable in translating Eleanor's theoretical innovations into manufacturable products. Stephen, the first production engines are exceeding even Eleanor's projected efficiency improvements, Arthur reported, wiping his hands on a clean shop rag. The automotive manufacturers are estimating that widespread implementation could reduce national fuel consumption by 30% within a decade. The environmental and economic implications were staggering, representing savings that could reach hundreds of billions of dollars while dramatically reducing transportation-related pollution. Eleanor's suppressed innovations were finally poised to deliver the benefits she had envisioned in the 1940s. Agent Foster arrived for her weekly briefing on the ongoing federal investigations that had expanded from the original fraud case into a comprehensive examination of corporate suppression practices. The Justice Department had established a special task force dedicated to identifying and prosecuting similar cases of innovation suppression. The congressional hearings are scheduled to begin next month, Foster announced, her professional demeanor reflecting the gravity of proceedings that would examine decades of corporate malfeasance. Chloe, they've specifically requested your testimony about the technical aspects of the suppressed technology. The prospect of addressing Congress about her grandmother's innovations represented both an honor and a responsibility that Chloe approached with characteristic seriousness. Her testimony would help lawmakers understand the broader implications of innovation suppression and develop policies to prevent similar conspiracies in the future. Dr. Murphy had been working with the Smithsonian Institution to create a permanent exhibit honoring Eleanor Baker's contributions to automotive history, ensuring that her legacy would be preserved for future generations of engineers and historians. The recognition represented long overdue acknowledgement of Eleanor's pioneering work. The Eleanor Baker Memorial Laboratory is scheduled to open next year, Dr. Murphy reported, showing architectural plans for a facility that would serve both as historical monument and active research center. It will be the first federal laboratory specifically dedicated to preventing the suppression of beneficial technology. The memorial represented more than historical recognition, serving as a symbol of the importance of protecting innovation from corporate interference and ensuring that beneficial technology reaches the people who can benefit from it. Frank Davis had coordinated with other local business owners to organize a community celebration that honored both Eleanor's legacy and the Baker family's perseverance in uncovering the truth. The event drew participants from across the region, creating a festival atmosphere that demonstrated the community's pride in their neighbors' achievements. Stephen, the governor, wants to attend the celebration, Frank announced, holding up official correspondence that confirmed high-level government recognition of the family's contributions. He's planning to announce state funding for automotive innovation research based on Eleanor's principles. The political support represented validation that extended far beyond personal recognition, creating institutional commitment to preventing future suppression of beneficial technology and supporting innovation that serves public interest rather than corporate profit. Ethan had been accepted into the engineering program at Case Western Reserve University, his involvement in the restoration project having demonstrated practical skills that impressed admissions committees and scholarship foundations. His uncle Mike's machine shop had become a key supplier for the new facility, creating economic opportunities that spread throughout the community. Chloe: I've been thinking about specializing in manufacturing technology, Ethan said, studying blueprints for production equipment designed to build Eleanor's revolutionary engines. Someone needs to figure out how to mass produce these innovations efficiently. The practical considerations of implementing Eleanor's technology required expertise in manufacturing engineering that complemented Chloe's theoretical understanding, creating opportunities for collaborative development that would accelerate the transition from prototype to production. Officer Carol Thompson had been promoted to detective based on her professional handling of the initial investigation, her careful documentation of evidence proving crucial to the successful federal prosecution. Her advancement represented recognition for the important role local law enforcement played in exposing corporate fraud. Stephen, the district attorney, wants to discuss additional charges against other companies that were involved in suppressing Eleanor's technology, Carol reported, carrying documentation that suggested the conspiracy extended beyond the companies already prosecuted. This case has opened up a whole network of corporate malfeasance. The expanding investigation demonstrated that Eleanor's case was not an isolated incident, but part of systematic suppression that had denied consumers access to beneficial technology across multiple industries and decades. Maria Parker had documented the entire story for a book that would preserve the historical record while inspiring future generations to question corporate authority and fight for innovation that serves public interest. Her diner had become an unofficial headquarters for visitors wanting to learn about the discovery that had transformed the community. "I'm calling it the engine that changed everything," Maria announced, showing the completed manuscript that captured both the technical achievements and human drama of the baker. Families struggle for justice. Eleanor's story needs to be told, so this kind of suppression never happens again. The historical documentation would ensure that Eleanor's legacy extended beyond technical innovation to include lessons about corporate responsibility and the importance of protecting beneficial technology from suppression motivated by profit rather than public interest. Stephen found himself looking at his transformed life with emotions that ranged from pride in his daughter's achievements to satisfaction at seeing justice done for his wife's suppressed legacy. The struggling garage owner had become the administrator of a research facility that would shape the future of automotive technology. "Eleanor would be proud," he said quietly, watching Chloe work with the same careful precision that had characterized her grandmother's approach to engineering challenges. She always believed that innovation should serve people rather than corporate profit margins. The philosophical principles that had guided Eleanor's work were finally being implemented through facilities and programs that would ensure beneficial technology reached the people who could benefit from it, rather than being suppressed for corporate convenience. Chloe looked up from her latest project, a hybrid power plant that combined Eleanor's efficiency innovations with modern electric motor technology. Her green eyes held the same determination that had driven her to uncover her grandmother's hidden legacy, despite powerful opposition. "Dad, this is just the beginning," she said, her young voice filled with confidence and purpose. Grandma Eleanor proved that one person with good ideas and determination can change the world. We're going to make sure her example inspires others to keep fighting for innovation that helps people. The legacy extended beyond technical achievements to include moral lessons about the importance of perseverance in the face of powerful opposition, and the responsibility to ensure that beneficial innovation serves public interest rather than corporate profit. As the sun set over Clearwater, Ohio, the lights in the Eleanor Baker Research Facility continued burning, illuminating the work of engineers and researchers dedicated to implementing suppressed technology and preventing future innovation suppression. The impossible engine had been fixed, but more importantly, the principles that guided its creation would continue inspiring future generations to fight for justice and innovation that serves humanity rather than corporate greed. The story that began with a mockery had ended with vindication, transformation, and hope for a future where beneficial technology would never again be suppressed by those who valued profit over progress. The end. Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, you won't want to miss this. Just click to watch, and don't forget to subscribe. It would mean a lot.